Hello YouTube and welcome to another tactical commentary for IL-2 Cliffs of Dover. It's been a while since I last played, but I just couldn't wait any longer for the beta patch to get finalized, so I just downloaded and installed it and hopped into ATAG and decided that I would go give it a spin, see what changes have been made. Now, I knew that I was going to be rusty at the game after not playing for several months, so I figured if I have to relearn some things anyway, I might as well take the opportunity to learn a new plane. So I decided to learn how to fly the BF-110, and after doing some basic familiarization with the cockpit, figuring out how to get it started and everything in single player, I hopped straight into ATAG and decided to take one for a spin for my first combat sortie, and that's what you guys are seeing right now. The variant that I'm flying is the BF-110 C7, which is virtually identical to the C4, which is the other variant in the game. The only difference between the two is that the C7 can carry bombs and the C4 can't. That's really the only thing that you'll notice. Flying the BF-110 successfully as a fighter requires you to really play to its strengths. This isn't the kind of plane that is forgiving of any kind of mistakes that you make. The strengths that it does have are firepower. That's the main one. It has 4 30 caliber machine guns in the nose, and also in the nose underneath are 2 20mm cannons. It has a ton of ammunition for these weapons. It has 1,000 rounds per gun for each of the machine guns, and 180 rounds for the cannons that are reloaded in 60-round drums. The navigator who sits behind me actually reloads the cannons for me every time each 60-round drum is emptied. So it has a lot more ammunition than a BF-109E does, for example. The firepower is, once again, all concentrated in the nose. So when you aim and when you're firing at somebody, you're firing this tight stream of just concentrated firepower. And anytime you hit somebody, you're not just hitting them with 1 or 2 guns, you're hitting them with a torrent of machine gun and cannon shells. So as far as firepower goes, this thing is not lacking at all. Another strength that it has is its speed. It's actually quite fast. It should be about 2 miles per hour faster than the BF-109E. Once they get the FMs tweaked to be closer to their historical levels, that's probably what you'll end up seeing in the 110. It does have a bunch of very noticeable weaknesses, however, that keep it from being a complete fighter, or as well-rounded a fighter as the 109. And the main one is its maneuverability. Now, it's actually quite nimble for a 2-engine plane. It's not like it's a bad turner for its size. The problem is that when you're using it as a fighter, you're not fighting against other 2-engine planes. You're fighting against single-engined fighters like the Spitfire and the Hurricane or the Yak on the Eastern Front. And all of those fighters are much more maneuverable than you are. So you cannot hope to outmaneuver single-engine fighters in a dogfight. Another disadvantage of it compared to the 109 is that its rate of climb isn't really that spectacular. It's okay. It's got a decent rate of climb, but it can't compete with the likes of the 109 or even the Spitfire. So what that means is if you engage in maneuvers where you're burning tons of energy, you're bleeding off your speed, then it's much more difficult to regain the energy advantage in a dogfight once you've lost it. So it does not forgive you for just throwing away energy. So you have to be very careful with the way you fly it. For this sortie, I had a very simple plan since I'm not that experienced in the BF-110. I decided I'd play defensively and try to get used to it for this first real sortie. So I decided I would just patrol up and down the coast and kind of guard the Calais area where there were a bunch of targets. So here I am over Calais, and I've just spotted some airplanes flying around right off the beach there. And I came down to check it out and see what they were, and I see that flak is going off, and I also saw that the fuel depot is on fire, so it just got attacked. And I see two fighters here, and I see that one that's passing underneath, that's quite obviously a 109 because I saw the yellow markings. And behind it is a Spitfire with its guns blazing. So I fired that burst to try and scare him off of the 109, even though I probably wasn't going to hit him. And as I pull up here to loop around for another pass, it looks like it actually worked because he broke off of the 109 there, and I think he's looking around trying to find me. But he's not expecting me to be coming from above, so I dive behind him and slip in behind. Now, watch carefully with this burst, because it happens so quickly you'll probably miss it. But 1 and 2, there go his elevators. That burst right there stripped off his elevators, so he has no control over his aircraft anymore, and he bails out before the plane crashes. And there you go, that's the firepower right there. I mean, I barely pulled enough lead, but the cannon rounds that did hit just shredded his tail. And that's really all it takes to bring down an aircraft. So I climbed back up and took watch again over Calais and this whole area. And there'd been a lot of activity here. Apparently there's a bunch of targets, either that or people just like to take this kind of northeasterly approach to the Calais targets, because this is how everybody has been coming in to hit that target. So I figured I would just perch here and see what I could find. And I just recently got a radio report of some more damage to the Calais fuel facilities, and as you see right now, I'm getting a report of Blenheims spotted in this area, and they're really low altitude. I mean, 200 meters, they're right off the deck. So now I knew what I was up against, and Blenheims are British medium bombers. They're 2-engine aircraft, and as I was diving down to look for them, I saw all these flak bursts down there, and so I knew there was one there, but I couldn't see him. So I just kept looking, but I could not find him against all the ground clutter. So I decided to just keep my speed up and loop around to where I could see the harbor, because I knew that's where they were going. That's where the depots were. And figured I would just watch over there and see if any airplanes flew over. And sure enough, they are down there. And so I start to make an approach. I haven't spotted him yet, but my navigator apparently sees one. And I'm searching down over the buildings right now, but as I get closer, I still don't see anything. Other than the burning fuel depots, which are kind of distracting my eyes, I suppose. But as I drift out towards the ocean, I notice a shape out there, and I decide I would get a little closer to try and confirm what it is. And sure enough, I don't know if you guys can see it based on the streaming quality, but there is an airplane out there, and as I get closer, I start to see what it is, and now that he's banking, I can clearly see the twin engines and the RAF color scheme, so that right there is definitely a Blenheim. So I opened fire hoping for a lucky hit, but I realized that I just ran out of cannon ammo in that drum, so I break off the attack to give my navigator some time to reload the cannons before I come back in for another pass. So I just maneuver above and try to keep watch on him. And as you can see, I am having a little bit of trouble aiming, and part of the problem that you'll probably soon see is that, just like I used to do with my 109s, I went in with the ammo belting for the machine guns and removed all the tracer rounds and replaced them with Bactone, which is these observer rounds that kind of explode into smoke when they hit, instead of using tracers. And the reason I do that is because the machine gun tracers confuse my eyes, so I can't see the cannon tracers, and the cannons are the firepower. But here, the problem with it is that when I don't have the sure shot to hit the cannons, I fire with the machine guns instead. But without tracers, I really had no idea how much lead to pull, whether or not I was too far ahead, too far behind. So I end up just wasting tons of machine gun ammo and probably don't hit him at all until the end here, when I start to get closer. And I mean, that's a lesson learned. It's just, I gotta get better at aiming, and that'll happen once I shake off some of the rust. But right there, I just got the message up there that I killed the pilot, so I broke off. And I broke off right into the face of another Blenheim that's coming straight at me, and this one is on fire. And as the other Blenheim crashes, I decide I'll slip in behind this one and kind of watch him. And right here, I can see that his defensive gunners are shooting at that 109. So I figured I'd put a few rounds into him to make sure that he goes down before he can do any damage, since he's being stubborn and isn't bailing even though he's on fire. So I sneak up on him and try another long-range deflection shot with the machine guns, and this time I get a little bit more luck. Now there's a bunch of hits happening, and I get close and seal the deal with the cannons, and so I pull off of him. And he ends up bailing out right here. But since in Cliffs of Dover there's no more kill stealing, since it basically gives you a percentage of the score based on damage done and not who got the last hit. You know, whatever is required to bring down the enemy plane. In real life, I wouldn't have counted that as a kill anyway, since in the Luftwaffe shared kills weren't counted. But overall, pretty successful sortie, and I did manage to shoot down a Spitfire and one Blenheim on my own, so not too bad. I wanted to stay in the air for a lot longer, and I actually had enough fuel on me that I should have been able to stay in the air for another hour, but I had to make an emergency landing, which is what you guys are seeing right now, because, as I feared, the fuel system still, I don't know exactly what the problem is with it, but it's not as broken as it was when the game was first released, but the fuel system kind of malfunctioned on me. And as you can see, the two red lights by the fuel gauge are on the right side. Basically, my right wing fuel tanks are both empty, well, almost empty. They're running on fumes, and my left two are full. So the plane is unbalanced right now as I'm coming in for this landing approach, because all the weight's on the left side. And basically, instead of pumping when I ran out of fuel, or ran low on fuel in my main tanks, what you're supposed to do is pump the fuel from the reserve tanks into the main tanks. And it worked for the left main tank, but when I flipped the switch to get it to start pumping the fuel into the right main tank, it didn't do anything. So I started to panic because it wasn't pumping the fuel. So I started flipping the switches, and eventually it did start pumping the fuel, but instead of pumping it to the right main tank, it pumped the fuel from the right reserve into the left reserve, which is totally useless. The engines don't draw the fuel from the reserve tanks. And yeah, that was a horrible landing. It was a really rough landing, and I hope that I will get better at it as I get more familiar with the plane. But since the engines can't draw fuel from reserve tanks, it doesn't make any sense for the game to be making me transfer the fuel from reserve to reserve. And so I thought, okay, well, that's fine. I'll have it transfer the fuel from the left reserve into the right main, since it, I guess an extra step, but at least I'll be able to keep flying. And when I told it to do that, it didn't do anything. So I think that's just a problem with it. Somebody probably coded it wrong and just mislabeled the tanks that it pumps to, and it thought that my left reserve was my right main. But hopefully they will fix that in some later patch when they get done obsessing over the single engine fighters. But for now, I guess I'll just be flying the 110 with only 60% fuel so that I don't have to worry about the reserve tanks, which is a shame, since without the extra fuel, it only has the same fuel endurance as the 109, which kind of defeats the purpose of taking it, but such is life. Overall, good sortie, and I did really enjoy flying the 110, and I'll probably be flying it some more. I hope you guys enjoyed the commentary, and if you did, be sure to hit like or subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, just leave a comment or send me a message, and that way I'll be able to respond, or at least be able to read what you guys have to say. So see you next time, YouTube.